Welcome back, listeners. This is Ravi from the Fraud Technology Podcast. Happy to be back here again. As you can see, I have a change of setting. I'm doing an outdoors recording today. You may have some noises. Hopefully, I can edit it out. But I love the setting. I wanted to bring that out into the podcast itself. And for today, we have Varun Wanka from Upgrade. He has a lot of experience in the fraud space itself. So, I wanted to bring him on board and hear to some of his insights fighting the fraud itself. Welcome, Varun. Would love to know a little bit about you and how you ended up in the fraud space itself.
Um, Thank you for that detailed introduction, Ravi. I can see that you're in a different setting and it seems very pleasant, by the way.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, coming back to me, I've actually joined fraud space
Mm,
like around 6 years ago, you could say, and before that, I was mostly in the technology space.
mm, mm,
But coming to the fraud, like one thing that really like interests me is there is like new learnings every day. When I initially started it out, I would say like I'm new to it, especially on the financial side,
mm,
and like learning about, hey, how does a card present work? How does a card not present work? And everything was pretty new to me.
mm,
But then I was lucky to have like a really good mentors at that time who had like patience to teach me everything and like, teach me everything about fraud, to be honest.
mm,
But also with my background experience from technology, it
mm,
really helped me to get quicker in fraud because, as you know, data is a key factor in fighting the fraud.
mm,
So that kind of helped me to jump quickly.
mm,
And with the use of data and analytics, try to get into those,
mm,
what do you say, nitty-bitties of finding, like, hey, where could I actually find the fraud and everything. But and after that, joining Upgrade, it's a medium startup right now,
mm,
and here it's a good experience because I'm learning a lot of new different kinds of fraud,
mm.
uh, and I've been enjoying it for now.
Wonderful, wonderful. I see a lot of
Mhm.
people in the fraud space coming from the tech background,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
ideally, especially around SQL and like database tech
yeah.
side itself, which I'm guessing is also your background, right? In the technology
Yes,
space.
yes.
Yeah, yeah. So I also see, I mean, quite a few people with that background doing really well in the fraud space itself. So can I understand a little
Yeah,
bit about what exactly you do? I mean, you're a fraud analyst, right? So do you build the
yeah.
models or do you actually are an analyst when alerts come in, you investigate them? What exactly is your role?
So we don't really build the models like an analyst. We have like a data science team over here who
Okay.
does the whole thing, but we kind of you could say as like a second tier where
Okay.
we work, we use the models and try to, because models, right, they work really well,
Mm,
but it doesn't really always catch the changing fraud trends, if you know
okay.
what I mean.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
let's say you have like many transactions coming on and there is a model that builds where, there is individual scoring for each transaction, but
Mm,
then it could not always happen like that. There is a sudden change
mm,
where the fraudsters could get a hold of like really
mm,
like a lot of credit cards or anything, and they could actually do like legitimate transactions,
mm, yeah.
and the model wouldn't have been trained for it yet.
Mm,
So that's where we come in to see, hey, okay, I see a pattern over here that the model isn't catching it. So
mm,
let me first investigate it and see, hey,
mm.
if we would able to like catch it better.
Okay. Mm,
And also, if we think that, okay, this is seems to be like a new pattern that
mm,
we did not notice that before, that's when we go to the modeling team or anyone saying that, hey, I think this is a new pattern. Maybe we need to train the model
mhm,
in a different way so that it could catch this fraud pattern.
mm.
But
Okay.
the problem with this is, you know, they keeps changing. So we can't always like telling like, hey, this is a new fraud pattern, go and change the model. That
Mm.
couldn't happen always. So
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I think as a fraud analyst and as a data science team, we have to collaboratively work like to make sure both of us are up to date in running the models
Mm-hmm.
and share each other's knowledge
Mm-hmm.
so that we could mitigate some of the fraud risk. I know we couldn't completely remove it, but at least
Mm-hmm.
reduce those fraud losses.
I understand, understand. So you talked
Mhm.
about modeling, giving a scoring for each transaction, and based on
Yeah.
that scoring, something is decided whether it's fraud, right? And
Mhm.
I'm assuming that above a score threshold, it is considered a alert and actually comes to the
Mhm.
fraud analyst team, right? So that's the
Yeah.
process. Okay, all right. So when an alert comes to you, then you investigate that, and then you decide whether it's a false positive or true hit, right?
Yeah, but that doesn't really work on the transactional side because,
Ah, okay,
there are like billions of transactions, but usually that happens on the onboarding and
okay.
like if you have to like catch any identity fraud or account takeover, that's usually the process. But for transactional fraud, we have to figure out like, hey, if there is a pattern coming from those models, let's say I shop at a regular store nearby my house,
Mhm,
but then my transactions start popping up at Brazil or somewhere
mhm,
and the pattern keeps changing like that, like hey, there are transactions coming from Brazil and then Argentina and from different countries, so we
mhm,
have to figure out, oh, so there seems to be like a new pattern where they're using a merchant in Brazil to
mhm.
do some kind of an attack over there.
Okay, okay. So this would be the modeling team doing it, or would the analyst team be doing this?
So usually the modeling team, what they do is they would run this model, but the model has to perform really well where it could say that, okay, if this guy does his transactions every day at a local store, but then suddenly a transaction popped up at Brazil. Like, how did the score jumped up?
Okay.
Like, we don't want like an immediate jump to because I might be traveling there. So all those factors comes into the picture, and then the fraud analyst like us, what we do is we kind of determine, hey, if this is actually a fraud pattern in there, like seeing multiple, because we just don't focus on one customer, we focus on like hundreds and thousands, and then see that okay, so if there is actually a fraud pattern and this is truly a fraud, or is just a false positive that actually a customer is traveling there and we are good to go.
Okay, okay, okay. So maybe let me take a step back then. So you mentioned that there is a difference in how it is done for onboarding and ATO versus a transaction. So how is a setup done for transaction fraud? How do you go about, because you have billions of transactions that are happening, right?
Yep,
How do
yeah.
you go about which ones to investigate?
So typically we don't do here on a customer by customer basis.
Okay.
So we typically tend to see how the fraud pattern is coming up. Like
Mm,
it could be either it's coming from a zip code
mhm.
or it's either coming from a specific merchant. So these
Okay.
days, what's happening? I think it's across the industry.
Mhm,
Is the fraudsters are trying like a bin attack process. So they choose like a specific bin, either
So
a credit.
before you go into the detail, what is a bin, please?
So a bin is the first six digits of our credit card number.
Oh, okay, wonderful. Oh.
These days, what's happening is the fraudsters, they're using like a sophisticated bot attack to
Mhm,
target a particular bin. As I was saying, like bin is the first six digits of your credit card number, and it is a unique for each financial institution. And
okay,
every financial institution might have multiple bin numbers too.
okay.
Like the bigger the financial institution, there are
The more.
multiple bin numbers, and
Okay.
yeah, so what's happening with these is the fraudsters are they're clever too. So what's happening is they would choose like a vulnerable merchant
Mhm,
where they don't have many controls in place.
mhm.
It could be like a mom and pop store, or it could
Okay.
just be a regular high merchant too,
Mhm.
Discord
Like
or
an online one
anything.
or a physical one? Online one
It
or
could be
physical?
both.
Oh, it is both. Okay.
But mostly they would do like a card not present transactions.
Okay.
So what
Online.
happens is they get these like they get these first six digits
Mhm,
or they choose one of those bin numbers,
mhm,
and then they use this vulnerable merchants to do like a to write like a sophisticated bot program.
mhm.
And what happens is they try like multiple different combinations because they only have the first six digits, right? So they'll just tell the program to run those different kinds of permutations and combinations to match a number and then run it through this merchant. Like maybe it could be like $1 or $2.
Mm, mm.
So, but within a span of 5 minutes, there could be like 5,000 transactions or 10,000 transactions coming in.
Mm.
And what's happening over here is almost 80% of them won't go through, if you
Mm.
think about it, because they're
Yep.
just trying all those
Random
combinations.
numbers. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's just, if you think about it, for the card not present, you need like an expiration date, CVV, and all the numbers to be matched. So
Mm.
they could be missing out, and we could have like a multiple different reasons coming out of it too. Like,
Mm.
hey, either they got the number right, but the card was already terminated, or
Yeah. Mm.
it didn't match anything specific.
Mm.
Uh, but they would eventually catch at least 5 to 10%, I would
Mm.
say.
Mm. Mm.
And then they know that, okay, this thing is working.
Mm.
Then they know that, okay, this 5% of the cards, they have those card numbers, which is,
Indeed.
think about it from a huge industry scale perspective, it's huge.
Yeah. Mm.
And what they $1 transaction, like customers, like I personally wouldn't know if a dollar transaction happened on my statement because I don't see my statement on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Uh,
Understand.
and then all of a sudden, like we see like $100 transactions or $200 transactions because they know our card numbers. Or what they could do is they could just use that 5%. They don't want to be caught themselves. They would just
Mm.
use this 5% to do like $1 transactions, and probably they would have gotten successful with 1,000 transactions. That's like $1,000 for them.
Okay. Okay.
So that's how they do these sophisticated attacks. But our model, right, when it could be the mom and pop store could be something like your next door or something. So from an individual perspective, the score wouldn't have gone drastically up. But the fraud models, like they do catch in a sophisticated way, seeing that okay, this merchant keeps popping up and they didn't had any transactions before, like in such a huge scale. So that's when it'll start elevating the score.
Yeah.
But then by then, if you think about it,
Mm.
I wouldn't say like too late, but at least some of the transactions would have gone through already.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
So there is no like right answer saying that, hey, because we as a humans, we always couldn't keep an eye out like every hour or every minute.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to understand where are the risk factors, like how much threshold can we let it go through,
Mm.
and take controls from there.
Okay, got it, got it. So this sounds very close to a brute force of attack that people used to do on passwords, right? I mean, it sounds
Yeah,
similar to that because you're kind of guessing the things and they'll keep brute force
yeah.
hitting the particular server, right?
Mhm.
So I'm surprised that there are no controls at the merchant's end, which is what you are talking about. That probably they don't have
Yeah,
as many controls as they should have, right?
yeah. I mean, if you think about it, it's the merchants. I think the fraud is overseen on the merchant side
Mm-hmm,
because I feel like merchants need to be educated too.
mm-hmm,
Let's say if a large dollar transactions comes in, if instead of using $1, what if they're using like $90?
exactly. Uh-huh,
And if even if they don't get successful with 99%,
mm-hmm.
1% is still like very harmful,
Yeah,
not just for the financial institution, because we can go ahead and so chargeback is again telling the
claiming
merchant
money.
saying that customer is not authorized, so we need the money to go back. So there
Mm-hmm,
is a chargeback fees too. So it's actually expensive for merchant.
mm,
So I personally think that the merchants as a whole also needs to understand how fraud works and
mm-hmm.
how costly it is.
Yep, yep, yep. Okay, okay. So basically, when you are saying card not present, so how would somebody do a bin attack on a mom and pop store? How are they getting access to that? Because they are a mom and pop store would be using a POS terminal, right? And POS
Yeah,
terminals typically are not necessarily connected to the internet, or maybe they are connected in the backend but encrypted into that, right? So how are they?
yeah.
What is the point that they attack? Because in a website and password I can visualize that somebody is entering the password or basically hijacking the backend connection, right? But in a mom and pop store, how does that happen?
So usually for the mom and pop store, they mostly attack the card not something on their website.
Mm.
So I wouldn't say
Okay. Mm,
the moment I can give you like an example of a mom and pop store. So it could be
mm,
a book,
mm.
like
Bookstore.
an online bookstore that
Mm,
or something that comes on top of my mind is some I wrote a book and I wanted to sell. I'm a blogger and I wanted to sell my book in online,
mm.
where I open up an online website and then I
Okay.
put like, hey, if you want to buy my book, this is go to this, just enter your details and we are good to go. These could be like something that are very new merchants,
Yeah.
or these could be
Mm.
something that they don't really focus more on the online side.
Okay.
And that's when they see this vulnerability on the online website where, okay, I think we could use this to
Mm.
whatever program that we have to run it over here and then
Awesome.
do in
Awesome.
a
Understand.
large scale. Yeah.
I understand. Understand. So I'm like this reminds me, right? And again, probably I'm having a dialogue here rather than I am probably not an expert at this, but what I'm thinking out loud here is probably there could be a scoring to the merchant itself, whether the merchant has good controls or not. And let's say somebody who doesn't have any controls could have a low scoring, and then any transaction that they can have a lower threshold, right? I'm guessing that's what the modeling team does anyway, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's, as I said, there is no one right solution for it because there could actually be one customer, one or two customers who are legitimately trying to do the transaction over there, trying to buy my book, but uh,
Mm,
uh,
mm,
but they, but
mm,
and we are blocking them or anything because we've seen a fraud attack from before.
mm,
So it's, I think it's important to understand that these like how much the merchant or anything, they should understand that okay, there will be a fraud
mm,
coming in place,
mm,
but
mm,
how much of that risk can be taken?
mm. Okay, okay, understand. Yeah, yeah. Okay, cool. So let's go to a different topic itself. So I keep hearing in the fraud industry, a third party fraud, second party fraud, first party fraud, right?
Yeah,
So one, I would
yeah.
love to understand if you can explain what are these types of fraud and how would you differentiate them, and what is probably out of these types of frauds, what is more challenging to counter?
Uh, honestly, every fraud is challenging because there are there are more creative ways nowadays than, like 10 years back, I
Mhm,
guess, on how sophisticated they're trying to
mhm,
be. And it's just like we are trying to catch up
yeah.
on stopping them. So let me start off by saying how the fraud actually goes by.
Mm,
So let's say if you are a startup or a neobank where you're trying to get the customers and you become from a small scale startup to like a medium scale startup,
mhm,
and now the main thing is how to stop the fraud. I feel the first kind of fraud is identity fraud.
mhm,
So
mhm,
where it's basically happens during the onboarding process
mhm, mhm,
where the fraudster has access to the customer's identity information. He
yep.
probably has information related to his SSN, phone number, and everything. And
Mhm,
surprisingly, and it's not even a surprise that they could read the OTPs too
mhm,
these days, because we've been seeing that, people actually, like fraudsters, can actually read our phone OTPs because we thought it was secured
yeah.
from before.
Yeah.
So the first thing is the identity fraud where they're trying to create like a, either they're trying to open up a new account or trying to create a new loan.
Mhm,
And the problem with this is, let's say they're trying to open up a new loan and they're
mhm,
trying to get the money out
mhm.
from the loan they opened. They even have access to the customer's bank account.
Oh wow. Mm, mm, mm.
Yeah. So what happens is they take this money and they put it in the customer bank account and then they immediately move it to like a different places.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
But
Mm, mm. Go
yeah,
ahead. Go ahead.
that
Sorry.
could happen too.
Mm,
So when I say like identity fraud, it could be that they have access to
mm,
all their information,
mhm,
and it's just that they might not have a few things. Like
mhm,
some of the key factors I mean, I tend to think are like email address, or phone number or all this.
mm.
They could have like an SSN information, but they couldn't have like an email. But
Yep.
it's easy to open up an email, right?
Mm, mm,
So they open up an email and
mm,
they try to verify their email verification, everything, and now and the loan is approved. And then
mm,
once they got the money,
mm,
it goes back to the customer's bank and from there move to different places. So
mm,
that is a risky one.
mm,
And
mm,
but this is the first kind of fraud that I see, identity fraud. And then
mhm,
the second is account takeover,
mm.
the other major one. So
Yep.
account takeover is usually I'm sure like most of us are familiar with it, but this
Yeah.
is after opening up your account. Let's say I opened up my account like 2 years back,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't really use it often now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's just that I use it only for like few transactions now and then, but
Yeah.
I think I haven't used it in like an year.
Mm-hmm.
And then I suddenly see my account being taken over. So what could happen is they could probably open up my account using my login credentials,
Mm-hmm.
and they might not, as you said, they might not have my password yet,
Mm-hmm.
but they do have my email.
Mm-hmm.
So they would try to reset my password, and the reset password could be either through OTP or email verification or anything, which they do have access to.
Yeah.
And then what they would do is they would probably go there, change their phone numbers. You
Mm-hmm.
might never know.
Mm-hmm.
And later on, the thing is, we since I'm not actively monitoring it, I don't know if what is happening to my account.
Mm-hmm.
And then
Yeah.
suddenly I get these payment, or like, usually most of us, they do like monthly payments, right?
Yeah.
And then suddenly on from
You
my
see.
bank account, you see like a payment going to this. I'm like, I didn't even use this. Like, where did this come from?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Uh,
you could be too late, or
mm-hmm.
it's so that's usually the account takeover. So that is, I feel these two are like one of the most important ones. And the other one that I usually see is synthetic fraud too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Synthetic fraud is having all your information, but you're creating a completely new person out of it.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say they have my SSN phone number and everything. My name is Varun, but they would create someone called Ravi with all this information,
Mm-hmm.
and then they would actually use this, create like a completely new person to open up a completely new loan account. But
Mm-hmm.
since your SSN and everything, it belongs to me, I
Mm-hmm.
would like, if anything default happens, that will come to me.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Okay,
Yeah,
so they take the loan, but on the bureau side, or to everyone, to the financial institution, you are the one who is liable, basically,
yeah, yeah.
right? So why wouldn't they use just your name? Why would they need to create a? So how is it different from a the first fraud that you talk, identity fraud that you talked about?
Again, this is not as common as identity or ATO. It's just that they might not have access to their bank accounts. So they would have opened up bank account with another name,
Mm-hmm.
and they wanted to use that same
Ah,
information so that the bank account matches too.
oh, okay, okay, okay. So they already opened a bank account, and because when you're going to give a loan, you're going to check whether that business bank account's name
Yeah.
matches to your name, and so
Yeah,
the name
because
has.
usually
Mm,
these are all the controls in place for like financial situations to see, hey, we just don't send money to anyone, right? It's to make sure we have controls in place to, okay, if this bank matches to the actual customer who is speaking, or if it's like a completely different person or anything like that. We don't want to do that. So
yeah, yeah,
that's why I feel like the fraudsters, they kind of know
yeah.
how
How you
financial
guys
institution
operate?
controls, yeah, how
Yeah.
the controls work,
Uh-huh.
and then they try to find those little nitty gritties, saying that, okay, I think there is a space over here. Sorry, I just want to say one thing, like, but
Mm,
so with the neo banking and stuff, like,
mm.
the thing is important is, stopping fraud is important, but also the customer experience is important too.
Yeah.
So it's a right balance, kind of makes us a little hard.
Mm. Okay. Got it. Got it. Got it. So you briefly talked about, that fraudsters know what controls we have in financial
Yeah.
institutions or the process itself, right? Which essentially makes them kind of experts on fraud controls itself, which is right for them to be able to be at that level. They should be an expert of that itself, right? So I wanted to understand how the kind of fraudsters that you're seeing. Like I would expect, like in previous years when the controls were not that many, you could have an opportunistic fraud where somebody stumbles upon an opportunity to get money out, right? But now it
Yeah.
seems like there has to be somebody motivated and expertise in doing it, right? So is there a trend that you
Mhm.
see in the last 6 years that you've been working, how fraudsters themselves are evolving?
Oh, definitely. So first of all, it kind of brings back to like how internet has grown in the
Yeah.
past couple of years,
Mm,
and how sophisticated everything has been, like how easy it is.
mm,
So that also means our, like, the from the financial standpoint, the loans are increasing, though credit cards usage is like all-time
Increasing.
high.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that also means that the fraudsters are also evolved,
Mm-hmm.
and it's before it was just like a stolen card, and then you could get like, hey, I've stolen a card, and then just do like some kind of fraud. But it's,
Mm-hmm.
as I said, from the first one, like bin attack, they
Mm-hmm.
could actually buy like card numbers from a dark web and then use that for like doing any kind of transaction. So definitely the fraud has been evolved a lot from the past from what I've seen in the last 6 years.
Mm-hmm.
And it's but one thing that I've noticed personally was is there's always like a test thing the fraudsters do, and this is from my understanding, like
Mm-hmm.
just to make that the fraudsters usually try to test how their strategy works on a fewer scenarios, and then they try to do like a wide scale. But this doesn't happen all the time. Like sometimes they just go all in. But the one thing, yeah, but from what I've seen, they tend to start off small and then go from there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Understand, understand. And you also talked about technology, how it's been evolving, right? So, and obviously, the talk of the town now is generative AI, right? So,
Yeah.
what do you feel about it? What is your initial feelings about how the tech is, either for you or for the fraudster itself?
So obviously, like generative AI has grown, especially in the last, I think, 1 year.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's one of the biggest revolutionary, like right after iPhone, is what I think personally, because like it is really helpful, even on our day-to-day basis. Like if you wanted to do anything, or but from a fraud standpoint, if on the fraud, like it keeps changing. If we have access to generative AI, even the fraudsters might have access to generative AI,
Exactly.
and yeah, and it is a very powerful tool. I can say that it could really help us in stopping the fraud. And because one of the major things is like anomaly detection. If there is any anomalies from a daily different pattern, and I know we have like models running right now, fraud models or anything that able to catch those. But I think with generative AI, it could be more powerful. And the one other use case that I think with generative AI is like, matching up with like biometric verification or anything like that. That could be really helpful
Yeah.
because I could say that it could really help us in catching those biometric verifications. But if you think about from the fraudster side, now they have this generative AI to create a face of mine and then create a loan application. Like who would stop them? So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think there is no right way, and I couldn't say that generative AI could completely stop fraud. It won't do that. End of the day, the manual processing needs to be done. But it's just that it would be really helpful for us with finding those nitty-gritty patterns using generative AI.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay. So the other type of fraud that I would love to understand a little bit, and probably I'm not the best person. I actually live in Singapore, and so my knowledge about the U.S. payments ecosystem is also very limited in that sense, right? But I wanted to understand one type of fraud, which is around ACH fraud, right? And
Hmm.
I would love to hear some more details about how this fraud happens and how you guys fight it.
So ACH, as you know, is a payment you usually like if you have like a credit card balance or anything like that, you wanted to pay it off
Mm-hmm.
or pay your balances. That's like an ACH transaction you're doing from your bank account to your
Credit
credit
card.
card balance.
Mm.
So one
Is it
thing,
within the same bank or a different bank? It's also
different
it
bank. I
can
mean,
it can be different banks as well.
it can be a different bank. So let's say I have a Chase account and then I have a Wells Fargo bank
Mm,
account.
mm.
I'm trying to pay off my credit card, a Chase credit card using Wells Fargo.
Got it. Mm.
So I'm doing an ACH transaction for that.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
the thing with the ACH is it was always considered to be safe because we need to have like a routing number, account numbers, and everything. And but the problem is there could be a returns fraud too, saying that, hey,
Mm.
I didn't do this authorization. I didn't authorize that,
ACH.
to go through this ACH transactions.
Mm.
That could, but we've already cleared the balance for the customer, and then so from the credit card standpoint, it might not see too much, but let's say from the deposit standpoint, you say, hey, I've moved my money from one account to another bank account,
Mm-hmm.
and then the customer or the fraudsters would have probably taken that money from that deposit account and moved it to his personal or to multiple accounts. But then the customer says that, hey, I didn't do any of these transactions from my bank account. So
Mm-hmm.
the bank who he sent the money from, they wanted to get those money back
Mm-hmm.
because he said it's unauthorized.
Mm-hmm.
And the loss is from the one who is in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
So it could so that's what happens. Like the
Mm-hmm.
fraudsters might have access to both accounts.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then he did an ACS transactions from one account to another account and then moved it from here. It
Mm-hmm.
could be a part of like a money laundering too. We never know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Got it. Mm.
but it's important to know that having like the right controls in place can really help that. But usually ACH is you could say more trusted because it's one customer saying that, hey, I know that personally I've sent this money from this account to this account.
Okay, got it, got it, got it. So, and there's also new type of payment that is also coming up, right? The RTP, I believe real-time payment that is being tested right now. I think it's
Mhm.
came into existence in the last 1 year, right? So, is that going to be again? This is probably not related to fraud itself, but I wanted to
Yeah.
understand how the ecosystem is evolving from ACH to RTP itself.
It hasn't been like a very wide scale from what I've seen,
Mm-hmm.
because the fraud from the ACH is still comparably less compared to the other identity or from transactional fraud or anything like that. So I felt like it isn't wide scale yet, but you never know. The
Mm-hmm.
fraud keeps growing. So
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Got it. Got it. Got it. Okay. The other thing that I wanted to talk about was about third-party data and how it can help in a startup of how they can fight the fraud itself, and how do you
yeah.
use third-party data itself?
Oh, I think the more like no matter how much data you have, it's really important. So that it could be very helpful in identifying if it's like a truly fraud or any false positive or anything like that.
Mm,
But there is no like one solution saying that, hey, I think if we get all this data, we could able to stop the fraud. No, that
mm,
couldn't happen. But having, but it's important to know that uh, we consider all these like
mm,
what kind of data is important for us. Do we think finding the right information about the if the email is associated to the right customer,
mm,
or if the login they're doing it from, is it like a valid login or is it like a proxy
mm, mm,
coming in? So all this, we obviously as a startup we wouldn't know in the initial days. So
yeah.
that's where the third party data come in, where they could help us get this information, and from there we could use this to determine if whichever the new application that comes in, if it's like a truly fraud or it could be false positive. I've seen people doing weird things that we thought, okay, it's truly fraud, but coming up it's like it's not. It's not. So
Uh,
so you wouldn't always rely on the data, but
mm,
it's important that all this can help us determine if it's like, okay, uh,
mm,
considering all these factors, because
mm,
you one of the third party might give us how the email is connected to the customer, or one of
yeah.
the other
Mm,
third party can give us like, hey, how if the login IPs coming in, is it actually like legitimate or not? So
mm,
you just have to combine all these
mm,
and then and then make that conclusion saying that, hey, I think based upon all these variables and factors,
mm,
I think
mm.
this is truly fraud, or it might not be fraud.
Okay. Okay. Wonderful. Wonderful. My final question is probably, and again, this is something that I ask all my guests: is what is something, I mean, being in the fraud space, right? What is something that is frustrating to you that you think that should have happened, and either from a technology or a regulation or any of this point of view, what is your frustration that you would like to? Would you think that it is easily solvable, but it's not happened?
Oh, that's actually a great question. So I think so for me, when I initially started on the fraud,
Mm,
so my frustration was how, like, it's basically that how could we, like, you think this control has to be in place,
mm,
but you cannot, but you don't have that in place. The control is not in place
mm,
because you think, hey, I think this is like basic. I mean, let's say if we are changing a phone number.
mm,
I'm just giving like an example. Let's say
mm,
we are changing a phone number on an application,
mm,
but then there is no control in place saying that, hey, you can change it like this. There is no like a verification happening.
mm.
Uh, Again, this was when I was starting back
Starting
then.
out. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and I see like, isn't that like normal saying that, hey, if you're changing a phone number, you have to make sure it's connected to the right customer. It's connected
Yeah.
to the customer who is present,
Mm,
and that's that felt like very frustrating to me on the initial days. So now, like, all these are normal, like, hey, if you have like a new application, if you're changing a phone number, it's mandatory to do anything. But there are a few things that still happens,
mm,
thinking that, oh, I think over here, I think you need to do some control in place, either some verification or a biometric thing
mm, mm,
that'll uh the
mm,
thing like makes sense.
mm,
But
mm,
but as a person who fights fraud, you think it's common.
mm,
But if you think from business perspective, it's a customer experience too. That's important
mm,
too. So
mm,
you need to give like a friction. Like, you don't want to give too much friction to the customer.
exactly. Mm,
So I understand, like, from a business perspective, it's not really needed. But from a fraud standpoint, oh, I think it's really important over there. So I think it's a right balance to see that, hey,
mm,
if we do this over here,
mm,
how many customers are we like losing, and
mm,
also how much fraud losses we might have. So I
mm,
think having the right balance is kind of
mm.
important.
Understand, understand. That was really insightful, Varun. Thank you so much for spending the time with me,
Mhm.
and would love to have you some other time back again. And
Yeah,
thank you again. Have a good day.
yeah. Thank you so much. You've been really great. All the podcasts were really
Mm,
informational
mm.
and really helpful in my personal work too. So
Yep.
keep doing what you're doing, and thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you, Varun, and see you. Bye.
Bye.